Nasrallah, escalating the years-long conflict between the two nations and its Arab allies and triggering a bigger war in the Middle East. Seconds into the attack, Israel put up its anti-missile system to intercept Iran and sounded air raid sirens as residents scrambled into bomb shelters. Israel's Iron Dome and other aided technologies like arrows, etc., often spoken of, but that's not the one that sounded the alarm this time around. Iran's ballistic missiles were fired at a much higher altitude, and the Iron Dome can only intercept short-range rockets. Israel used the mid-range David Sling system this time around, which is designed to shoot down ballistic missiles fired up from 100 kilometers to 200 kilometers away. It's developed and manufactured jointly by Israel's state-owned Rafale Advanced Defense Systems and a US firm. The long-range Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 interceptors were developed by Israel with an Iranian missile threat in mind. The systems are designed to engage threats both in and outside the atmosphere, and they operate at an altitude that allows for safe dispersal of any non-conventional warheads. All these three systems were last used by Israel in April this year to intercept more than 300 drones, ballistic and cruise missiles launched by Iran. They were all in action even last night. Iran's top military officer Mohammad Bagheri has claimed that Iran's ballistic missiles targeted two military bases of Israel and the headquarters of Mossad, Israel's intelligence service. Netanyahu is currently meeting security chiefs at the Defense Ministry headquarters in Tel Aviv. This after Israel Chief of General Staff, the head of the Shin Bet, and also the head of Mossad held consultations. Tuesday marks the second state-on-state attack Iran has launched this year, both aimed at Israel, both predictably blocked by the Israeli air defense systems, including the Iron Dome and arrows. The surprise is that the response came not from proxies, but with a state-on-state attack targeting Israeli civilians. Bharat is watching the situation very closely. Top government sources have told CNN News 18 that Bharat is concerned about the safety of Indian missions, diplomats and staffers abroad after attacks on various missions. An advisory has been issued, and the next step will be evacuation in case the situation deteriorates. Let's go across to our guest this evening to assess this. Is this no longer a proxy war? Is the escalation ladder being climbed by both nations? Any retaliation by Israel almost guaranteed? Will it further worsen situations in the region? What is going to call for peace or a holding back, with Israel even declaring the Secretary General Antonio Guterres a persona non grata on its ground? Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Senior Fellow IPCS, with us in just a bit. Glenn Carl, former CIA officer, joining us via Skype from Boston. Flor Hassan Nahum is the former Deputy Mayor and Envoy Israel. And joining us from Tel Aviv, Mohammad Najib is a journalist, Palestinian journalist and defense analyst, joining us from Ramallah. Namaste, thank you very, very much. My first question is going to be to Glenn Carl. Glenn, from a distance, how do you assess this situation? The US is right in the thick of it. There was an assessment by an expert which said that all the protagonists in this are in a race for time. They want to do whatever they can from their vantage point ahead of the US presidential elections.
Well, I'm afraid that that is a good assessment, or an accurate assessment, that for the next 5 weeks, the Biden administration is a lame duck administration and is, if not constrained in what it may try to do, actually diminished in the actual influence that it has over Israel, or, for that matter, the U.S. political process, which affects our defense policies in the Middle East. We know that if Donald Trump wins, that Israel will not be constrained at all by any efforts of the new incoming administration. And even if Harris wins the presidency, then there's still a 8-week or whatever it is period before a new administration comes. And in any event, the U.S. has limited influence on Israel or in the region. The U.S. influence in the region has always been less than U.S. supporters and people frustrated with U.S. policies have always thought. And so I think that is a correct assessment, that Netanyahu will not take too much consideration into calls for moderation.
Flor Hassan Nahum, what will be Israel's response, and can we expect it in the next 24 to 48 hours? And does that then push the region further into flux, because Iran will then be compelled to respond?
Were you referring to me? I'm not sure.
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. Yes, good afternoon. Well, one thing is certain. Israel will retaliate, and I wouldn't put it in the scale of moderation or non-moderation. This is something that any state would have done. If India would have been attacked in Visant Vihar or Chanakapuri, I don't think that a few hours would pass without a retaliation. This is something that any country would do, and Iran will pay a very high price for its attack. It was warned not to do, as you mentioned, a state-to-state, not only countries, but a state-to-state attack. And the next stage will be, we don't know when, we don't know where, but it will certainly happen. And please look at the state of affairs. We're talking about a year long of war between Israel and 7 fronts that have been attacking Israel, most of them as proxies of Iran. Iran behind the scenes. Now, some of the proxies have been weakened, Iran exposed, and on April 14, one attack that we remember very well, but last night was much, much tougher, I can tell you personally. I'm now sitting in the shelter. The number of close by booms, the house was trembling, and this is in the center of the country. Think what's happening near the border. Think what's happening with the tens of thousands of displaced citizens. So I think my predecessor was talking about Netanyahu doing whatever he wants or not. I think that any responsible leader would take action after what Iran has been doing yesterday, which was, I think, an historic event.
No, my question, and Glenn was responding to the fact that all the protagonists, be it Iran, be it Israel, be it the Hezbollah, be it whoever are the entities, will not want to push matters beyond or climb maximum ground ahead of the US presidential elections. Somewhere that seems to be a sentiment, and Glenn Carl was weighing in on that. But Mohammad Najib, till the time it was Hamas, it was the Houthis, it was Hezbollah, it was these entities via Israel versus Israel. It was not a direct two-nation fight. It was not between two sovereign nations. Has Iran's hand been forced here? And does this now put Iran at a disadvantage?
Iran usually fighting Israel through its proxies, Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah. But what happened recently, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Iran, embarrassed the Iranian regime and put them under heavy popular pressure to react to the Israeli assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. And after that, also Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon and the Quds revolutionary group who was also killed in that attack. So Iran came under pressure, and it was Lord Israel of retaliation. But since a year until now, Iran preferred to fight Israel through its proxies, the Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, the groups in Syria and Iraq, and Hezbollah. But recently, the Israeli escalation forced Iran to retaliate by itself, to convey a message to Israel and to its supporters and the proxies in the region that it is powerful, and to maintain the support for Iran.
But this statement at what cost, Mohammad Najib? Because this also puts the entire region on the precipice of escalation. Is Iran okay with escalation in the region?
I think it was a limited attack against Israel. No one killed in Israel. It's just little damage. And only one Palestinian was killed. And this also angered the Palestinians. However, today the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called in Iran to stop this attacks and escalation. Actually, Iran is interested in continue the escalation in the region. It was feeding Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis to continue their attacks. And unfortunately, after a year of the war in Gaza, we see that there is no sign of reaching an end to that. And there is a Palestinian, Arab, regional, and international concern that this war could be expanded to include Lebanon and to Iran and Israel. So that will lead for a worse situation if that's happened. And the whole region countries going to express their concern from that and call on the international power to contain that. But also here, the Israel continue the attacks supported militarily by the United States. Also, this encourages Israel to continue. And the people here think that the allegation of the Israeli military operation in Lebanon is limited, is not limited. It's a kind of deception, and it could be expanded to include all Lebanon. And Israel will retaliate against the Iranian strike. So it could lead for a regional war between Israel and Iran, and some countries will be engaged and forces and cause instability for the region.
Ambassador Kaman, how would you want to respond to that? I saw you nodding your head there.
Yeah, no, I have to tell our friend from Ramallah and our neighbor, 20 minutes from here. Ramallah is 20 minutes from here, believe it or not. Israel has no aspiration whatsoever on Lebanon. We always said that Lebanon would be the second country with which we would do peace, but unfortunately Lebanon was conquered, occupied, at least South Lebanon, by Hezbollah. I myself am a personal victim of Iranian and Hezbollah terrorism, but that's another story. So I think I know what I'm talking about. I've followed this thing since 32 years ago, and let me remind you that hundreds of American and French Marines were murdered by terrorist organization Hezbollah. I would not go so far as to talk about the all-out war, but beyond what I said a minute ago, I want to suggest to take this very complicated crisis and slowly, gradually, maybe form something that this region needs,
right.
Which is a coalition. Last night and on the 14th of April, it was not only the US, it was the US and a few other partners. We don't know exactly whom because it wasn't published, but I tend to believe that some countries from our region also were partners in not letting Iran do whatever it wants to do. So it was led, the coalition was led by the US, Britain helped, France helped, but some regional partners helped too. So if you look mid-range and long range, I think that forming a coalition that would be the peace coalition, and hopefully the Palestinians will join this coalition. That would be my hope against those who are around Iran, and we don't have to give you all the names now because they are very well known, including the proxies of Iran that would be on the axis of evil, which exists already. The axis of evil exists, and Iran with its proxies and a few other players are there, and we see them. And just to remind you, Iran has been calling for the destruction of the state of Israel for years now. And they not only declare, they also try to do it.
Yeah, Iran's official position is that the Zionists are occupiers. That's what they believe. They believe that Israel are occupiers of land that actually does not belong to them. So that's a stated position that's come from the Iranian regime under the Ayatollah Khomeinis and the others, especially them. They have maintained this position. Glenn Carl, you put your hand up for a bit. Your thoughts, and then I'll go across to Flor Nahum, who's joining us now, and also Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Yes. Yes, Glenn.
Yes, thank you. Well, the legitimacy of the state of Israel to exist is a pretty fundamental point, which really has been resolved in virtually every capital and every society for many years now, with the exception perhaps of Tehran, Hamas, and Hezbollah, even arguably too. However, the dynamic right now is, in the public view in the world, that Israel has become the aggressor somehow because of the horrible things happening in Gaza. You have to keep in mind that Hezbollah has, by launching hundreds, if not thousands of missiles for many years, particularly in the last year, has rendered the top 10%, 20% of Israel, the northern part of Israel, essentially uninhabitable. And no state can accept that. Israel has never preemptively struck to seize territory, with the exception of what's happening in the West Bank in particular, which is a whole other issue, although related. So any state would have to respond to actions that make 20% of its territory uninhabitable. If that were to stop, Israel would not have done anything in Lebanon or towards Iran.
Fleur Nahum is with us. Fleur, your thoughts there. Ambassador Kamun, coming to you after we get a comment from Fleur. Do you agree with the conversation now? This escalation is dangerous because if this region has to see peace, there has to be de-escalation. Israel's point of view is that unless these proxies are done away with, Israel is not going to be safe. If you heard Mohammad Najib, he said 200 missiles fired but no damage done to Israel. Your ability to defend yourself cannot be seen as no harm's been done to Israel. 10 million Israelis were under bomb shelters for 2 hours, and that means that they are already walking on the streets at the ready because there is an attack at Israel from 7 fronts as claimed by the IDF, and just now Ambassador Kamun was making the same point. Where do you stand and what do you think is the way forward?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is jihadi Islamic fundamentalism, which is fueling the Islamic Republic of Iran to create proxies, to destroy the state of Israel, and to really destroy the free world. Israel is just the first stop on a much more ambitious tour. And this ideology, this is the problem. And let's not forget, because everybody seems to have forgotten, that we didn't start this war. On the 7th of October, we were attacked by Hamas, a proxy of the Islamic Republic of Iran. On the 8th of October, we were attacked by Hezbollah, a proxy of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We've been attacked by the Houthis in Yemen. We've been attacked by Iraq, all proxies of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So it's not about Israel fighting the proxies. It's about the world dealing with the head of the snake, which is the jihadi ideology coming from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And you know who gets it? I'll tell you who gets it. The Sunni moderate countries of the Gulf, they get it. Saudi Arabia gets it. And so do the Emirates, and so do Bahrain, because we've seen moderate Sunni countries who understand where the threat is coming from. And the sad thing is that they understand it, and somehow the liberal democratic West is still to wake up.
The consulate of UAE has been attacked in Sudan. It's a series of the last 3-4 days. There have been multiple attacks on the UAE consulate and the attempts that have been made. The Jordanian airspace was made available for the US interceptors to block the missiles. Clearly, there are nations in that region who do not see wisdom in this conflict at all. Egypt seems to have backed off. Flo?
Ultimately, everybody understands. In the Arab world, you have to understand that rhetoric is very important. Societies run by honor and shame. Iran felt it had to retaliate because Israel eliminated some arch terrorists that haven't just killed Israelis. They've killed Americans, they've killed French, and many other nationalities. It seems like the world doesn't want to deal with the obvious, but Israel will not allow any aggressors to come and pose an existential threat. We're the only country in the world that has to defend itself for defending itself. And enough is enough.
Abhijit Iyer Mitra, agree, disagree? Israel's the only country in the world facing war on 7 fronts or attack on aggression on 7 fronts, and it's got to defend itself for defending itself.
100%. You know, in India, we're such a huge country. We don't realize the kind of displacement that has happened. If you put this in the Indian context, imagine the whole of Rajasthan and Gujarat having to be depopulated, and the population of Rajasthan and Gujarat having to be put up in hotels or empty houses in the rest of India. That is roughly the sort of population displacement and spatial displacement you're looking at. Let's remember, till the 7th of October 2023, not 1 inch of Gaza was occupied, not 1 inch of Lebanon was occupied. Yet the attack happened on Israel. Horrible attack. I'm not going to regurgitate what happened because we've all seen all the horrors. We've seen some of the horrors, the real horrors we really haven't seen on TV. Hezbollah, which should have really minded its own business, decided on the 8th of October to declare war on Israel. and then starts firing rockets left, right, and center. From then to now, there have been 9,000 rockets. So almost, 300 rockets a day, thereabouts, fired on Israel so far. What is Israel meant to do exactly? So they take out Hezbollah targets one after the other. Mind you, they're only dealing with the symptoms. They're not dealing with the cause of the problem, because the cause of the problem has always been Iran. Then one day, in one of these operations, it turns out that the Iranian embassy in Damascus was deeply involved in all of this. Mind you, even in the pager attack, nobody seems to want to answer the question, what was the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon doing with the Hezbollah pager? He's been blinded in both eyes. How did he have a Hezbollah pager by? It breaks the fundamental laws of subconventional warfare if you have a direct link like that to a serving diplomat. And what happens is Iran launches a massive 700 drones plus ballistic missile attacks on Israel. Israel did not respond at that time in April. Let's remember that. What is Israel being punished for today? We honestly don't know. Israel has every right to blow up Hezbollah. Mind you, Hezbollah is the one that declared war on it. They have every right to blow them up with pages. Of course, we don't know if Israel did it, or Mickey Mouse did it, or Daffy Duck or Donald Duck did that pager explosion. But that aside, pagers go off, walkie-talkies go off, biometric devices and solar panels start going off.
Right.
Where does Iran come into all of this? Then the head of Hamas is killed in Tehran. Again, is there any proof of anyone doing it? We still don't have a unified story. Some say it was a bomb in the roof, some say it was an anti-tank missile, some say it was a drone, zero proof. And they launch a massive ballistic missile attack after Hassan Nasrallah is killed in Lebanese territory, which has nothing to do with Iran, on Israel. Now, if you're not expecting an escalation, who started the escalation? From day one, starting on 7th October. On 8th of October, Hezbollah declares war, deploying your embassy staff to support Hezbollah in a third country attacking Israel. Them having pagers. What does this all signify? They're the ones who've been incessantly, recklessly escalating. And, one of the things of being an adult is finding out that actions have consequences. So I think this is probably the maturing moment of a highly radical regime. They're going to find out what actions, what consequences are. And let's be very clear. If there is an Israeli strike, which there almost certainly is going to be, it is retaliation. It is the right of self-defense. Yeah, of course, they'll claim this is aggression and all of that.
It just what happens, Abhijit Iyer Mitra and Ambassador Kaman, it then becomes a never-ending cycle. Because Israel will say it has got the right to defend itself. Iran will now, obviously, it's bit the bullet. It's jumped out in the open and it's called the whole bluff out of the proxy war and said, I'm in the fight directly. Iran is now trying to say it's the only one that is keeping the Ummah together. It's the leader of the Ummah and the entire Muslim Brotherhood. That's the position it is aiming to take. So where does this end then?
It ends when the nuclear capabilities that Iran has been developing are stopped by the West, because you cannot have a country which is radical Islamic jihadi fundamentalism with a nuclear weapon. That is not just a threat for the existence of Israel, it's a threat for the entire free world. And that is the problem. And they are hurrying towards that, and nobody's dealing with it.
True.
We see the same appeasement strategy that was used with Hitler in 1930s, and the world has got to wake up. Enough is enough.
But Ambassador Daniel Kaman, that also means, and the same question applies to Glenn Carl, it's not just Iran that has got nuclear weapons. There are other nations that are sympathetic to Iran that can also enable it with nuclear capability. So these hostilities need not just be drawn just between these two nations. There are other entities involved. US is directly involved with Israel. There is Russia there is Pakistan, there is Turkey. There are other entities too.
I wouldn't go as far as starting the very a scenario of where will it end, because so many stages will happen until something really happens. But I think it's not right to look at it only as a bilateral struggle. I think we should look at the larger picture, and I think many of the participants in this panel have said that one way or the other. the picture is larger. It's the extremists. It's the fight of the world against terrorism, against extremist regimes. You mentioned, sir, that Iran is saying that Israel is an occupier. That's not even a pretext, because to talk about Israel occupying, that's a completely different story, and I can only hope that this will be solved in some way or another. But even when it will be solved, the threat from Iran and from the extremists will be there unless really confronted by the world, by the international community, by the United Nations, who still have not defined what terrorism is. And of course, the nuclear threat by Iran, which is there somewhere, but it's one of the most important dangers and challenges of the international community, who cannot deal with it because of the, let's call it, the sort of a Cold War which exists and still exists between Russia and China on the one hand, but that's a completely different story. Iran is a threat to the world in various aspects. It takes Israel as a facade, but the struggle is by Iran against the rest of the world, and the rest of the world should wake up to this. Maybe in the last few weeks, the world is waking up.
Now, Glenn Carl, how much of this hinges on what happens in the November US presidential elections? Whether it is Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, will that have a big impact? Because America does hold sway, both at the UN and also with what Israel does.
Well, yes, America remains the premier inter pares still, but I will repeat, the U.S. influence in the Middle East, on Israel, on Iran, in the region has always been less dramatic than certainly American opponents have believed, but even American friends have believed. I think most of us agree in the objectives that we need to pursue, which would really be regime change in Iran and the diffusing or somehow the dissipation of the whole jihadist theology, philosophy. Well, not infrastructure. No, because you can damage infrastructure, but
the philosophy.
It's much harder to
the thought continuum. You say,
Where we may differ is in what policies Israel, the United States, and the Western nations should pursue. I think you always want to leave your opponent, even a mortal opponent, some way forward, some way out. And were I in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, I would pursue, I think, the continued destruction of most of the capabilities of Hezbollah, and then accept the victory. Because a wider war, one can always start, but can never determine the exact outcome. And regime change in Iran, I don't think can be achieved by however impressive Israelis' military actions would be, or for that matter, the United States, barring a world war.
So regime change in Iran, and more importantly, a dismantling of this entire thought continuum of extremist philosophy. That perhaps is the solution. How one achieves that and arrives at that is another question. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I have to compelled to take a short break because we are standing by for the IDF spokesperson Peter Lerner to join us when we come back. Stay with us. Joining us now here on the right stand is IDF spokesperson Peter Lerner. Peter, namaste and thank you for speaking with us here at CNN News 18. My first question to you, even as we extend New Year's greetings to the people of Israel, but it's also come on a day where you've seen loss in Jaffa and Iran's missile strikes. How serious is the damage post the attacks last evening?
180 ballistic missiles were launched towards Israel from Iran yesterday. We were successful in intercepting many of them. Those that fell in open areas caused no damage, and there were a few that actually hit some locations, but also causing very limited damage. Luckily, Israel, or strategically Israel, has developed both active and passive defensive systems over the many years. So 10 million people headed to the shelters yesterday to take cover, and the active defense system, the Iron Dome, the David Sling, the Arrow systems, all operated in sync, deterring and basically defeating Iran's attempts to cause death and destruction in Israel. There is one person that was killed in this attack, a Palestinian just outside of Jericho. The unfortunate reality, but this is what happens when you launch indiscriminate rocket fire towards or missile fire towards someone.
Peter, Iran has claimed that it was only targeting 3 military establishments in Israel and it didn't target civilian areas. They've also claimed to have hit 2 of Israel's air bases and damaged a fleet of F-35 and F-15 aircraft. Can you corroborate that, please?
So our Air Force is fully operational, patrolling the skies and defending the skies and striking both against Hamas in Gaza, and obviously, as the war has evolved in the last 2 weeks, against Hezbollah in the north. Of course, they tried to conduct many strikes against many different locations. If you saw the map of how many, over 2,000 alarms sounded during the attack, they were unsuccessful at damaging us and creating any significant problems for our forces and definitely for our Air Force.
Peter, soon after the attacks, Iran issued a statement even at the UN, and also the president said the same thing, that they don't want to escalate matters further, and it was up to Israel now. Israel has meanwhile said that there will be a response to this attack. So what happens next?
So since the 7th of October last year, we've been facing 7 different fronts. Iran has been one of them. This is the second time they've launched a direct attack on us. It's unacceptable, unfathomable, and no one in their right mind would accept even one ballistic missile fired at them, let alone 180. They can't be allowed to do this without there to be consequences. And as the government, the Prime Minister, the Defense Minister, the head of the military have said very, very clearly, we will exact a price on Iran for their aggression against us, against the people of Israel, and putting so many people in risk and in harm's way. So, of course, there will be a response, and the government will instruct us to operate as it sees fit.
Well, Bharat has officially stressed on dialogue and diplomacy because one concern is the level of escalation. This entire region could be pulled into war. What is the IDF's position on this?
As you've seen throughout the course of the war against Hamas or now against Hezbollah, our targets are very precise, are chosen strategically in order to take out the enemy, deplete their capabilities, and address the threats immediately. We've shown that throughout the course of the last year. We are not interested, and definitely not interested in a broader exchange, but what do you expect us to do when Iran launches 180 ballistic missiles at us? Just accept that that's the reality? No, that's not a reality. We will calculate exactly what it is we want to send over, what type of message we want to send to the Iranian regime. They can't be allowed to have this type of influence. What has happened is that effectively they built these proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, and Hamas operated independently, drawing the whole region into this turmoil. And now, effectively, Hamas has caused the elimination of Hezbollah's chief, Hassan Nasrallah, this week. and now has caused the situation where Iran will also pay a price for their aggression against us. So effectively what has happened is the proxies they thought that they could use to distance themselves from the violence has brought them in the heart and center of the violence.
With the Israel chief of staff, the head of the chief of Shin Bet, the Mossad chief, they have been in a huddle. The prime minister is in the situation room. What's the nature of the meeting? What's the discussion? Can you shed some light on it?
So, of course, we have open discussions, open channels with our American allies on all different levels. I think what happened yesterday with our colleagues in the United States Central Command informing us, speaking to us, that they had identified that Iran was planning an imminent attack on Israel, and how together we defended the skies and the people of Israel. Now, Iran is the destabilizing force of the region. We need some stabilization. Iran needs to get in check. And I would say that the government, and as to relate to the discussions that are ongoing, of course, all of the heads of the defense establishment together with the government will determine what is the best path forward, and they will instruct us, the IDF, to implement that.
Peter, the IDF is also mounting a ground offensive in Lebanon. There are reports of some reversals, some losses for the IDF in the action today.
The IDF is conducting its cross-border operations, which have increased over the last 2 days. We have 2 divisions that are operating on the ground in order to address the attack infrastructure that Hezbollah had established in just across the border in anticipation. And what they wanted to do was a 7th of October-like attack against Israel. We are currently dismantling that. And in those operations, indeed, we understand that there can be situations where there are skirmishes, exchanges, direct confrontation between IDF forces and Hezbollah. I would say, yes, we've made an announcement about one, but the situation is dynamic. It's something that has the unfortunate reality of warfare, as you very well know, but we will make announcements as the situation develops.
My final question is something being planned over the next 24 hours.
I wouldn't talk about specific dates, times, or hours. The government will instruct us, and we'll take our steps accordingly.
Peter Lerner, thank you very much for speaking with us here at CNN News 18. On that note, we're going to take a very short break. When we come back, Bharat is watching everything very closely. The escalation in West Asia is not a healthy sign, especially for growth initiatives. Former Foreign Secretary and former Indian Ambassador to the United States, Harshvardhan Shringla, takes the right stand.
At L'Oréal Group.
Joining us now is the former Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringla ji. Harshvardhan Shringla ji, namaste.
Namaste, Anand ji.
Jai Hind, and thank you for your time. How would you read the current situations, the escalation ladder that both Israel and Iran have now climbed?
Well, Anand, what we have seen yesterday was a severe escalation in the Middle East conflict. As we know, the conflict began about a year ago, the present phase of the conflict, when Hamas launched a unilateral and unprovoked terrorist attack into Israel, killed a number of civilians and took a number of civilians hostages. That precipitated an Israeli response. Israel then entered the Gaza Strip and have been there ever since in that attempt to deal with Hamas and rescue the hostages. In the meantime, we've seen an escalation from, the Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis from Yemen. Both these entities, as well as Hamas, as we know, are controlled by Iran. What I think is the difference is that now Iran has got directly involved in this conflict. So far, it has been activating its proxies or the entities it controls. But now it seems to have got into the conflict directly. And yesterday's wave of ballistic missile attacks on Israel was not the first; it was the second time this has happened. But clearly, it represents a major escalation. The other factor, of course, is that while it was in the beginning just Israel and the Hamas in the Gaza Strip, today Israel is involved also in terms of its physical presence in southern Lebanon. Israeli troops, as we speak, have crossed into southern Lebanon and are attempting what they call a limited military operation. I don't know how limited that will be, but they have across Lebanon. This is not the first time they've crossed Lebanon. It was in 2006 that you had Resolution 1701 that was in the aftermath of that conflict between Israel and the Hezbollah. The Houthis are pretty far away, but Israel has demonstrated it can strike right up to Yemen, which is much further away even than Iran. But Iran itself is within the reach of Israel. And if you saw, both the United States and Israel are talking about retaliation.
Yes.
U.S. National Security Advisor talked about severe consequences. And so the next phase of this conflict is likely to be even more, I would say, severe than the previous phases. A direct confrontation between two states. So far, it has been a state that is Israel fighting with non-state actors. But now, two states are directly involved in this conflict. Both states have the capacities to inflict enormous damage. They have military capacities. And it is entering a worrying phase where, things could escalate even beyond the region because the US has put its troops on alert, I think has brought in more assets into the region. There are other partners and allies of the United States like UK. And clearly, I think, this if you see, there is a G7 emergency meeting that's been called, and things seem to be taking a turn for the worse. So there is concern all around.
But in this case, Iran has said, you try and attack our refineries, we'll set the neighboring neighborhood, we will take the fight into the neighborhood and also the neighborhood refineries to fire. They have also said that they are trying to call all the Islamic nations to come together in this grouping, although a lot of them have tried to steer clear. There has been attack via Sudan at the UAE mission there in Sudan also. So there are some other ripples and repercussions. How would you read that?
So there are various fault lines that we have to look at. I mean, one of them is the Shia-Sunni fault line because Iran represents, a Shia power in the region. So the Hezbollah, the Houthis are Shia auxiliaries. Hamas is not, of course. Hamas is a Sunni auxiliary. But by involving itself directly in a conflict with Israel, through the Hamas, through the Hezbollah, through the Houthis, and now directly, Iran is saying that we are fighting the cause for the entire Ummah. In other words, they are fighting for the Muslim world.
Yes.
Whereas those, established powers in that region themselves are not involved. And as such is trying to take a certain amount of credit. But I think you can also miscalculate in this because I don't think Iran wanted to get very deep into this conflict. They wanted just to show and demonstrate that they are, how would you say, they are invested in this conflict. they would have preferred to work through proxies, through Hamas. Activate Hamas before the Abraham Accord could be signed. Activate Hezbollah so that Israel is distracted. Activate the Houthis in the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, and of course, directly with Israel. But now that they're directly involved, I think it takes on a new phase, and it could also be detrimental to their interests because Israel can inflict damage to strategic targets inside Iran, whether it is petroleum refineries, whether it is even the Natanz, nuclear facilities. We don't know, but I mean, obviously, Israel has demonstrated it has both the intelligence and the reach. And the fact that Iran is talking about, taking the conflict elsewhere into, say, the Gulf or areas that Western interests are strongly represented in, it is actually saying that if you do something to us, we may not respond symmetrically, we may respond asymmetrically.
Correct.
It may not hit out on Israel because it has shown what it can do, and that is what it can do. And yesterday's attack did not inflict the sort of casualties that might have been expected.
True, and Israel claims not much damage has been done, Iran claims otherwise, but this now no longer remains a proxy war, Harsh Shringla. From Bharat's point of view, we've got strategic interests here. The Chabahar port agreements and some rekindling there has happened with Iran, engagements have happened. There is the I2U2 pact where America, UAE and Israel are involved. There is the India-Middle Eastern Economic Corridor which goes all the way up to Italy. That also passes through some of these kingdoms and some of these regions. What happens to all of that?
So we have huge stakes in the region, starting with 9 million Indians who work and live in the Gulf area. We've got very good relations with Israel. We've got good relations with Iran. We work with countries across the region. And if you saw the conversation between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu, Prime Minister Modi said that terrorism cannot be justified and there is no place for terrorism in the world. But at the same time, he said that, we should make all efforts to basically, ensure that there is no regional escalation, which is happening, and to ensure the safety of hostages, which is important in Gaza. And then, of course, we have also, Prime Minister offered that India is committed to doing whatever it can, whatever efforts it can for an early restoration of peace in the region. So what we are saying is that it's so, we are so invested in the area, there is so much at stake for us, and that we are always happy to work in a manner that can be conducive to bring about peace and, better, I would say, relations in the region. Something like what we have done in Ukraine and Russia, because we have, as I said, good relations with all concerned.
Correct.
So we have the ability to tell all concerned that, look, this is the time that you should sit down and talk to each other, because an escalation can be, detrimental to your interests, but to interests of everybody else also. I mean, this is really having the propensity to escalate into a larger conflict and one that can engulf all of us. So I think we have to keep that in mind. And in that, I think Prime Minister Modi's message is very important in that context.
True. My final question, Harsh Shringla, do you believe that there could be a certain escalation from both sides in the near future in this region, so that perhaps there is some backing off and taking the foot off the pedal in Ukraine? Is there a connection here?
Well, the connection is that, one conflict takes off, the other one goes into the back burner. I mean, there are some concerns expressed that the Middle East conflict is taking up a lot of the bandwidth. And as a result, I think there is some sort of, less attention and focus on the Ukraine conflict. I think they're interlinked from the point of view that, the resources are the same. The Americans will have the same munitions that they would have to give to Israel or they'd have to give to Ukraine. The Western world will have to focus their attentions on, do they focus on the Middle East or do they focus on the Ukraine conflict? So these are issues that are dilemmas. I mean, obviously, nobody wants to see multiple fronts. Israel is fighting on 4 fronts already. But the fact is that it does divert the attention, at least from the Western world. It's not in their interest that it continues. President Biden has always been talking about a ceasefire. But one factor you have to note is that the US is distracted at this point of time because of its presidential elections.
Yes. Good evening, this is Brass Tacks. I'm Zaka Jacob. The Iran-Israel shadow war has now gone full throttle. It has become front and center, the most important conflict of our times. This after the first ever direct attack by Iran on Israel, firing close to 200 ballistic missiles at cities like Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, even a military base in the southern Negev desert on Tuesday night. Now, back in April too, Iran had fired a whole bunch of projectiles, many of them drones, some of them ballistic missiles, about 300 of them, but much of those were intercepted by Israel's air defense systems. But by doing what it did last night, on Tuesday night, Iran has conveyed to Israel that it can hit Israel at a time and place, and most importantly,